Song of Horror aspires to live up to the greats who have come before it. Legendary survival horror franchises like Resident Evil and Silent Hill are more than influences, they're clear role models whose impact on the game is undeniable. But Capcom and Konami's giants of the genre leave very big shoes to fill. Luckily, the team at Protocol Games are scholars of survival horror, not amateurs fumbling around in the dark. But let me make something clear right away. Like the works of the authors who inspired its difficulty settings, Song of Horror is a slow burn. If the game's trailers and screenshots piqued your interest with the eerie ambiance and outright frightening creatures, and you're expecting to do battle against them, you'll be sorely disappointed. The game isn't about fighting, it's about surviving. Your only hope against the nightmares that lurk in the dark is to run away, to hide, and to hope they don't find you. Song of Horror is survival horror in its purest form. Song of Horror's narrative centers around a music box, but like any horror story, there's more to that box than meets the eye. It's home to a sinister presence bent on consuming all those who hear its song. And the disappearance of the box's last owner, a famous but reclusive author and his family, puts you square in the middle of a supernatural mystery. What happened to Sebastian Husher and his family? Can the evil entity known only as the Presence be stopped? Is anybody safe? Well, that's up to you to find out. If Song of Horror's gameplay is inspired by games like Resident Evil and Silent Hill, its narrative is heavily influenced by the works of H.P. Lovecraft. The Presence, the game's main enemy, is rarely seen, but it's always there. The game is more interested in making you feel its monstrous presence rather than outright showing it to you. And like in any good horror, this works to its advantage, because really, it's what you don't know, what you can't see, that scares you. Song of Horror is a tour de force in atmosphere. Oppressive and tense, you'll never really feel safe, nor should you, because you're being hunted. The Presence is an AI that actively observes you. It studies and reacts to how you play. Think of Left 4 Dead's AI director, but scaled to a single-player experience. Running around like a headless chicken is one way to draw its attention, and staying in a room for too long is a good way to make it come banging on the door. The beauty of this is the replayability factor. Depending on how you play, each playthrough has the potential of being wildly different. And this mechanic's results are truly impressive, because you don't know exactly what the AI is looking for, or what it reacts to, what triggers it. You'll spend every moment thinking tactically. Should you run across the hallway to the next room, or walk there? Will you sacrifice safety for speed? Is there something waiting around the corner? Should you come back later? And yet things happen so gradually that you'll be left wondering if you're just being paranoid or if there's really something there. Things don't go from 0 to 100 in a split second. There's build-up, tension, unease. With every groan of a house's pipes, every creak in the floorboards, every ambient sound, you'll feel a tinge of fear run down your spine. And it speaks volumes about the Presence's AI that, at one point, I just completely gave up on exploring one section of a level. All I wanted to do was walk down a hallway to get to a room on the other end, but I was so unnerved by nearby sound, which was really nothing supernatural at all, that I just simply abandoned my goal and went exploring in the opposite direction. I can't emphasize how impressive this mechanic is. Nothing is scripted. And as if being hunted wasn't enough, Song of Horror pulls another punch: permadeath. Each of the game's 5 episodes lets you choose a character to play as. Now each has their own strengths, their own weaknesses, and their own reasons for appearing within an episode. But here's the thing. If they die, they're gone forever. This adds another layer of stress upon you. As you progress through an episode, you inevitably get attached to your character. As an extension of yourself, you obviously want to see them get through alive. And because nothing is scripted and your decisions and skill determines their fate, you'll take it personally if they die. I started the first episode with a character named Sophie. I picked her because of all the characters I could have chosen, I liked her backstory, and I felt that she had a pretty good reason to pull up at the Husher mansion. I got through 95% of the episode when the Presence took me by surprise, and I watched helplessly as it pulled Sophie into darkness. She was gone for good, and I was sent back to the character selection screen. Now this is something that Song of Horror does uniquely, and it implements it well. If a character dies, it's only their story that's over, with one exception that becomes clear if you play. Otherwise, you simply select another character and go back in. Progress isn't lost, because any advancements the previous character made are conserved. There is one challenge though. You'll need to head back to where the previous character died to pick up any key items. So as a quick example of how this can affect gameplay, after Sophie died, I went back to the mansion with another character named Etienne. As Sophie, during my first run, I'd got the power back on. But when I entered the mansion again as Etienne, the security alarm went off and scared the heck out of me. But for as fantastic as its atmosphere is, for as effective as the presence can be, and for how unique the character system is in the genre, Song of Horror isn't a perfect game. It suffers from some issues, especially in terms of gameplay. Now let's get the most obvious points out of the way right now. The game won't blow you away graphically. It gets the job done, but that's about it. Granted, we need to keep in mind that the game originally launched for PCs in 2019. I noticed a few dips in the frame rate here and there, enough to draw my attention, but not exactly detrimental to my experience as a whole. There's also voice acting. I'd like to say that it's hit or miss, but it's mostly miss really, and I have no doubt that the voice actors hired for the game are talented individuals, but a lot of the lines struck me as being phoned in. Now at best, characters sound relatively uninterested or unsurprised by the events occurring around them. At worst, there's just a complete disconnect between the character's voice and their model. And with no character did I feel this more than Officer Rene Artigas.
I don't know what just happened.
As a game without combat, Song of Horror falls victim to the same issues that plague other games of the type. Because you can't defend yourself, you need to hide from threats. And this means one of two things. Either you meticulously take note of every closet or table you can use to hide, or you die. And to its credit, the game tries to make hiding a little more interactive. For example, once you're in a closet or under a table, a minigame begins during which you need to keep your character calm by pressing the triggers to the beat of their heart. But if you intend on finishing the game, you'd better be ready for minigames. Sometimes you'll have to keep the presence out of a room, which entails running up to the door, then mashing the action button to build up strength, followed by the right trigger to block the door. And of course, there are other more immediate threats, such as the Revenants, the Silence, the Abyss, and the Requiem, which all seek to impede your progress. And while there's no combat in the game, some of these enemies require successfully completing a minigame to survive the encounter. I'd like to give a special shout out to the Silence enemies for the absolutely underwhelming tutorial and unintuitive minigame that accompanies them. For anybody who intends to play the game, here's how it works. Forget the tutorial, just hold both triggers and apply pressure as needed to keep your circle as close as possible to the second one that shrinks and grows. That's it. The problem with these minigames is they're just quick time events in fancy dress. And while I applaud the developer for trying to make encounters more interactive in a non-combat game, it does become tedious after a while. Sure, the first encounters are stressful and pulse-pounding. They leave you feeling shook but confident that you can take on the horrors in front of you. But after the fourth or fifth time, it's not so impressive anymore. And of course, it's always disappointing to lose a character just because you failed one minigame out of 5 or 6. For fans of old-school survival horror on consoles, Song of Horror is a fantastic entry in the genre. The love and respect that Protocol Games has for the classics is obvious and shows in every little detail in the game. A supernatural mystery worthy of Lovecraft, its story is almost infinitely replayable due to the excellent implementation of the Presence's AI and the large selection of characters. And although it suffers from tedious minigame mechanics and subpar voice acting, it remains an enjoyable game that every fan of the genre should have in their library. If Song of Horror had existed somewhere between 1996 and 1999, I can confidently say that it would be mentioned in the same breath as Resident Evil and Silent Hill. And that's high praise, but it's well deserved. Protocol Games wanted to make a memorable game that made others feel the way they felt playing classic video games. And in that regard, they absolutely succeeded.
Too late to request reinforcements. I don't know what that horrific thing was, but I must proceed.